Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Dr. Tom Gelbach. I'm a pulmonologist with KSB Hospital, and I will be reviewing some information on advanced care planning and advanced directives, and then Julie Ammon from the social work department will be giving some additional information on advanced directives. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So the topic here is advanced care planning, and this really refers to a way of planning ahead for your medical care so that you can receive the care that you want and receive the care that goes along with your goals and your values. A little bit of the history of this is that the advanced directive movement really grew out of the expansion of ICU care that happened in the mid-20th century. And along with that, the consumer rights movements of the 1960s and 70s, and just the expansion of what ICUs were capable of doing and keeping people alive. In the 1980s and early 90s, there were some sentinel so-called right to die cases that made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court that sort of added fuel to this movement of advanced care planning. And then in 1990, the Patient Self-Determination Act was passed, and part of what that does is requires healthcare facilities to provide information about advanced directives to patients. So at this point, in 2020, it has been well established for many years that patients have the right to decline life-sustaining interventions, to have life-sustaining support withdrawn. And some examples of those things would be, right now, the one that's getting the most attention would be mechanical ventilation, but also other aspects of care, including chemotherapy, transfusions, dialysis, nutritional support, and even surgery and antibiotics can be considered life-sustaining interventions. So the main take-home point that I really want to make here kind of right from the start is that the best way to ensure your wishes are followed is probably to have a durable power of attorney for healthcare. And we'll talk about some of the reasons that that's so important. A little bit more history here is that the United States has sort of a unique relationship with intensive care units, and I think it's important to understand this to help you sort of make decisions about the type of care that you would or would not want to have in the future. So the modern ICU was really launched by the polio epidemics of the 1950s and the need for patients to have support of their breathing, initially with the old iron lung negative pressure ventilators and then moving forward to positive pressure ventilators. The use of intensive care units then expanded through the latter half of the 20th century with organ transplantation, open heart surgeries, that required the use of ICUs to keep people supported after those major types of procedures. If we fast forward a number of years, it's interesting now that we are doing increasingly amounts of end-of-life care in intensive care units. And there was one study published a couple of years ago that looked at data from 2010, and during that year, out of all of the Americans who died with cancer, which is one of the leading causes of death in the U.S., 40% had actually spent some of their final days in an intensive care unit. And that's a very striking figure in itself, but I think it's especially striking if you compare it to other countries, such as Canada and some European countries. The other interesting fact is that we simply have a lot more ICU beds per capita, and we tend to use them. So I feel like the U.S. looks at intensive care units sort of like we look at other aspects of technology, and we sort of make the assumption, sort of the technological imperative, that just because something's available, it means it's necessarily good and it should be used. It's also a pretty well-known and commonly cited statistic that we spend about a quarter of the Medicare budget in the final year of life. We're in a society that tends to deny death. We're uncomfortable with the inevitability and the finality of it. We also have a payment system that traditionally has incentivized doing more rather than necessarily doing better care. And the other fact that I think sort of supports this is that if you look at burnout amongst healthcare providers, it's highest amongst critical care providers, and that really reflects sort of a disconnect between the expectations of providing critical care and what the reality actually is. So if you are to think about the type of care you'd want in the future, this slide is really with regards to benefits and risks of ICU care in particular. So I would encourage you and your family members just to think about this in terms of benefits versus risks. The benefits of ICU care can be very great. They can support people through reversible illnesses and can prolong life. Some of the burdens and risks that we need to think about are specific procedural risks. If you have a procedure done, typically we'll look for informed consent, but if it's an emergency, things may happen, and things can be done based on the reasonable person standard without necessarily getting informed consent first if it's an emergency. So there is a potential risk for unwanted interventions. There's also a risk of surviving the acute phase of the illness, but then having physiologic impairments and reduced quality of life that may end up being unacceptable. There's also a risk now of social isolation, just given the situation with the pandemic. And then, of course, the issue with resource utilization and costs, which usually doesn't factor into our decision making, but in the setting of a pandemic, it is factoring in now. So the benefits of advanced care planning, I think, can be many. So by planning ahead, you can improve your chances of receiving the care that you want, but also avoiding the care that you would not want. And one example would be CPR. So CPR, or cardiopulmonary resuscitation, by default is attempted unless you have an advanced directive or a DNR order that would stipulate otherwise. And on average, even in the hospital, there's less than 20% survival with a CPR attempt. So many people choose, if they have medical conditions that would reduce the likelihood of them surviving CPR, many people would choose to have something called a DNR order, or do not resuscitate. And Julie may be speaking with you more about that in the information she's presenting. So that's something to think about. Planning ahead can also help for those who would prefer to be at home at the time of death as opposed to being in the hospital. And I think another big benefit is that planning ahead can help remove the decision-making burden from your loved ones. So you can make your wishes known, and really that can be a gift to your loved ones so they don't have to face those decisions at a time of crisis. So what has this got to do with COVID-19? I think this is especially important right now. So we always hope to avoid unwanted intensive life-sustaining measures, and the first ethical principle of medicine is to do no harm. Right now, we're in the midst of the worst pandemic in over 100 years of its kind. We know that up to 20% of those with COVID-19 will require hospitalization, and up to about a quarter of those in the hospital will require ICU care, and often it's for the reason of mechanical ventilation. We also know that age and chronic illness are the greatest risk factors for severe illness from COVID-19. And our healthcare capacity is really stressed right now. The three S's being staff, space, and stuff. So our ICU beds, ventilators, frontline staff, these are not unlimited resources. And we're starting to see terms like crisis standards of care, allocation of resources, rationing. These are things that are coming up in many different places. The other thing to think about is that hospitalization now, for those of you who have had personal experiences or loved ones in the hospital, it's a different experience. Patients are generally alone. There are strict visitor restrictions. And ICU patients who may survive their acute illness often will require prolonged hospital care and rehabilitation. And any of those facilities right now, there will be strict visitor restrictions as well. So when you're thinking about the type of care that you would want and you're trying to lay that out in an advanced directive or in discussion with your family, it's important to think about some of these things because being in the hospital now is different than it was a year ago. In summary, I would say advanced care planning is especially important in the context of the pandemic. Probably the best way to ensure your wishes are honored is to have a power of attorney for health care. And it honestly forces you to sit down and have that discussion with your loved ones to help plan ahead so you can receive the care that you want. And as one intensive care provider up in Toronto had said in an article recently, because if you do not talk with your loved ones about this now, you may have to have a much more difficult conversation later. So these are a few resources I just wanted to put out there. So this is my email address, my office number. I have a special interest in this topic, and I spent some time doing research related to this during my training. There's also a booklet that's put out by the Illinois State Medical Society called A Personal Decision, and this is a great piece of information. It has some background information about decision making, and then it has all the documents, the living will, power of attorney for health care. There's the post form, which would include a DNR order. There's even information about organ donation, so a lot of good information there. That can be found on the website, or you can probably get a copy of that directly from the State Medical Society just by calling, and that's free. So please feel free to reach out with questions. Thank you. So now please stay tuned in for Julie, who will address issues related to advanced directives.
Hi, my name is Julie Ammon. I'm a KSB hospital social worker, and today I want to talk to you about advanced directives and power of attorney for healthcare and how important it is right now during the COVID times. I'll open up with a personal story. I have a daughter who went to the University of Iowa, and one evening she was practicing diving. I got a call from the university that she had been sent to the hospital. At that time, I called the university hospital, and they were not able to release me any information because she's over the age of 18. Thank goodness we had prepared for this time. We had completed a power of attorney for health care, and I was able to show those papers at the hospital at that time, and they could release all the information to me about our health care and what was going on in the emergency room. This is why this is so important to have. During this time and during when your loved ones may become ill, it's good to have this paperwork in hand so you're able to talk to the healthcare staff and so you're able to release information back and forth. I wanted to go over the power of attorney for healthcare forms. We're going to start with how to complete it. You're going to basically put your name first, your address, and then who you would designate to be your power of attorney for healthcare. This only can happen when you're unable to make your own decisions, or in our case, I had a daughter who's over 18, so we wanted the information to go back and forth. So she gave me permission to get any information, and you can dictate this in the power of attorney for healthcare. So you'd put down that person's name who you'd want to speak on your behalf or give the healthcare information to, their address and their phone number. And then down below you're going to go to I authorize my agent. There's many options. The first one is to make decisions for me only when I cannot make them for myself. This is when you become in a state where you're totally unable to make any healthcare decisions for yourself. So you want to pick somebody who can make those healthcare decisions for you. And this is toward the end of life decisions also. So you want to make sure somebody has your best interest. The second one is make decisions for me only if I cannot make them for yourself, but also have the right to call in your doctor's appointment, get information. Say if you're unable to do that, a lot for your elderly parent or your elderly spouse. This is a good section to check because that back and forth information can be released. The third one you can choose is make decisions for me starting now. And this also is very important to get done, because sometimes you don't know, we can't release information. Now with all the HIPAA rules, hospitals are very tight with the information they release to the family members. And the third one is you're going to do what's called a living will. And this part is a section where the quality of your life is more important than your length of life. If you come into the end of life decisions, do you want to be kept on a ventilator? Do you want feeding tubes? Do you want to be kept alive at all cost? Now, if you don't and you want just life to take its course, this is what you would check, is this one. And the second one is if you want everything done, even if the doctors have deemed that you're uncurable, there's no getting better, then you want to check this one. So when making decisions for your health care and your power of attorney, you're going to go to the living will section. Once you've made those checks, you're going to sign the piece of paper, and then any witness can be someone who wouldn't benefit from your death or your illness. So it could be your neighbor, it could be a friend. You do not need a lawyer to do this paperwork for power of attorney for health care. Anyone can witness this. Then you want to take the copy to your doctor's office so they can put it in your medical records, or put it on your refrigerator or in a spot where any family member or friend can see your information. I want everyone to have conversations with their families at this time concerning your advanced directives and power of attorney for health care. When these items are not in your chart or not checked off, at that point the hospital will do everything they can to keep you alive, but also they won't release any information to your loved ones because of the HIPAA criteria that we can't talk to anyone without this paperwork in hand. So I just want to encourage everyone to do the paperwork. We have copies here at the hospital. Also, your clinics will have information on advanced directives and living wills, or you can call me at KSB Hospital, and I also can do the paperwork with you. Again, if you have any questions, please call me at KSB Hospital, Julie Ammon, and I can assist you in some of this tough decision making, but also the most important decision you'll make, and also a gift to your family members and loved ones. Thank you.